I want to take up with you, Shekhar, this
Which is what I think
outsider's
was the
perspective on the inside of Delhi. Do you believe that, in fact, our government is a compilation of warring entities quarreling with each other, lacking a central cohesion, and often more involved in dispute than coming together?
Well, if you look at the government for the past 10 years, although it had ideological cohesion, you saw an element of that. In fact, most of this internal lack of cohesion came from within the core party of the coalition. But
You mean Congress?
In the Congress. But it's also true that Delhi has its institutions, its establishment, and its sort of rival poles in the establishment. Each one guards its territory very, very zealously. And I think Modi made a very good point, which unfortunately has not been picked up that much, when he talked about how there was such chaos in the government that one department of the government was taking another department to court. So when government departments start taking each other to court, one, it clogs the courts. Second, it runs litigation at public expense. And third, it just tells you that there is no leadership. So to that extent, he's being an outsider. He's actually projecting as an advantage. He's saying, I'm not tainted by Delhi. Mujh par Delhi ki chhap nahi hai.
And in other words, therefore, I have the capacity to change Delhi as well.
Absolutely.
Dipankar Gupta, a lot of that speech, and for many people it was perhaps the most important element, was Mr. Modi speaking on critical social issues that impinge on the lives of everyday Indian people. He spoke of the horror of rape. He spoke about the skewed sex ratio. He spoke about the need to guarantee the dignity of women. And he actually illustrated it with the fact that they're scared at night to have to go out even to the loo, and yet there are no loos at home. How glad are you, as a sociologist, that he touched on these key concerns? These are not issues previous prime ministers have ever thought were important enough to raise at Independence Day. How glad are you that Mr. Modi not only raised them, but went into them in considerable detail?
No, as I mentioned earlier, I'm very happy he did so, because I think Shekhar said it's all very well to make these grand pronouncements, but they really amount to nothing. Now here we have a prime minister for the first time drawing attention to these issues, and again, not discussing them in terms of high policy, but bringing it down to the family. And that's what I like very much, because then parents and children, when they sit together, they cannot but ruminate on these ideas, these views that Modi expressed this morning. And I feel that if things begin to change at the domestic level, there will be a great churn in the society, because that is one thing that's missing. And rape, toilets, women's dignity, and cleanliness. You've forgotten cleanliness. Cleanliness was a big thing here, and that again has a domestic aspect to it. Now, I don't quite know to what extent all of this will be, met without strong, strict state action.
That is the test of the pudding.
Yeah.
Here, the test of the pudding is the implementation, which I effectively
We have
means,
much fewer toilets per 1,000 people than Bangladesh.
which is shameful.
Which is shameful.
General Malik, one of the things that stood out for me was when Mr. Modi was talking about rape, and in a sense talking directly to the Indian people. He says we put conditions, we put bans on our daughters, but we treat our sons very differently. He asked, do we ask our sons who you've gone out with? Do we ask our sons what you've done? And he then clearly went on to say, every rapist, every Maoist is someone's son. The parents must take responsibility. As an army officer and as a father, did that part of the speech work for you?
No, there is a need for us to have greater awareness about the social issues, particularly the family issues, in which we have tended to look down upon the girls. And to that extent, I think, we need that social change in our country, and he is targeting the people concerned in the family, the father and the mother and the brothers. So I thought he was spot on as far as that is concerned. And while we can keep on educating our children in the schools and colleges, etc., hopefully that they will all understand these issues. But the social issues that come up to the fore day in and day out, whether it is Khap Panchayats or the families who have to follow the Khap Panchayats and all that. So I thought he was spot on that. He hit the bullseye, and I have no doubt that every person, whether he is educated or not, the man, the father, will understand that issue. Karan, I just want to talk a little bit, short sentence, on the governance that you were discussing earlier. I have been an insider in Delhi for a long time, and I have seen how the government functions in silos, great opacity, And in today's world, when we need to discuss all these issues comprehensively from different disciplines, I think he was spot on that particular thing, and that is required. And he was very candid, and I think as an outsider, or whatever he called himself, the fact is that needs to be done away with. And I thought he was quite forceful on that.
Alec Padamsee, as a theatre man and more importantly as a marketing and advertising guru, I want to ask you a particular question about the tone and manner in which the Prime Minister addressed the issue of rape and the role of sons. He seemed almost as if in a good-natured way he was chiding his audience, he was admonishing them, he was making parents aware that they were not rising up to their responsibilities, that they were treating their sons as if they were little gods. How will that tone and manner of putting the message across be received by the audience? Will they warm to it? Or might they, in a sense, be upset by the slight chiding manner?
Grandfatherly.
Or the grandfatherly manner, as the Pankar
I would
says.
just say that, yeah, Karan, I think that is a very good point he made. Extremely good point, and if people are his followers, they should listen to it. That we always ask our daughters not to do this and not to do that and not to do the other, but we never have any restrictions on our sons, and I think it's very, very unfair, and I really salute him on that point, I must say. But what was interesting is that having said it, muh se kaha, magar you have to actually say that I have changed and I'm going to treat my daughter as an equal person in the house, and that is the big challenge of communication.
Absolutely.
How do we get people involved? One of the comments that I thought was made on a program I just heard, which is excellent, was why doesn't he adopt what Chandrababu Naidu, I worked with Chandrababu Naidu for 3 years, from the year 2000 to the year 2003, and he had an excellent program where the Chief Minister would do a Q&A, question and answer, and people could write in their questions, and he would answer the questions on TV, talk about fireside chat. I think that was an extremely good interaction and a real democracy where the leader talks to the people, not through his ministers, but talks to the people directly.
That's good advice, and if Mr. Modi is listening to you, you never know your luck. He may well actually take it up and start following it. Meanwhile, Mr. Shestasai, one of the big announcements right towards the end of the speech was the decision to abolish the Planning Commission and to replace it with a new institution, although as yet we don't know what. Do you think that this is a clever, innovative idea that you welcome? Or are you a little concerned that perhaps the role the Planning Commission plays is being overlooked?
Well, frankly, I thought that one bit didn't quite sit well in that speech, because it appeared to be an odd man. That was an idea of substituting Planning Commission with something different. This has been talked about, and it's not clear precisely what that's going to be. He did talk about a think tank earlier on. I wasn't sure that this was appropriate in the overall architecture of that speech. But having said this, I think it's about time that we should talk about it. Planning Commission has outlived its utility in my view. Certainly there is something else that is required in its place, and therefore it's a very appropriate issue, but not quite part of the speech.
You know, I'm not going to talk about the appropriateness or the inappropriateness of talking about the abolition of the Planning Commission. I want to talk to you instead, Shekhar, about how you replace it with something that's new and different. And it can only be new and different if it's staffed not by civil servants, but by people brought in from outside government. But to bring them in, you've got to pay them. And you've got to pay them market prices. Otherwise, they're not going to come. And the government is very bad at rewarding people market prices. So do you think this new institution will actually be new and different, or is it just an idea that he's got, but it will be very hard to actually bring it about?
Well, paying market prices on the government structure is not possible. I mean, if that was possible, then Director of All India Institute of Medical Sciences would get paid at least the equivalent of what someone of half his experience makes at a private hospital in Delhi in a day. That can't be done. But yes, if you create a genuine think tank with some academic rigor, which does research, which produces ideas, I think a lot of good people with intellect and a good track record will come in. Of course, you have to look after them well. A Lutyens house is a very good privilege. It's worth a lot. So that is not the issue. The issue is, what will this new body do and what will be its powers? If it's a new body in another name but has the same kind of supervisory role over the allocation of central funds in the garb of deciding, again designing schemes and deciding what's good for the states, then it will make no difference. You basically have to take away the powers of the Planning Commission.
And therefore, this is one area where we need a lot more detail before we can judge whether Mr. Modi has a good idea, an imperfect idea, or a bad idea.
Absolutely. But having said that, let me add this, that this government needs economists. You know, the Planning Commission Deputy Chairman, Chief Economic Advisor in the Finance Ministry, and Economic Advisory Council in the Prime Minister's office, they're all missing.
Absolutely. Shobhade, I want to come in the limited time available to us on the stress the Prime Minister put on toilets, and then separately I'll come with Dipankar Gupta to the stress he put on village development. He said that in fact by next Independence Day he wants one toilet in every school for at least a girl. There could be separate toilets for boys, but that one toilet had to be for girls. And he asked MPs and MLAs to use their MP lad money for this. He called on businessmen to use their corporate social responsibility funds for this. How much applause, how much credit do you give him for this idea?
Oh, I'd give him 100 on 100 for that. I've been talking about it for the longest time, that unless we provide places, toilets for women to relieve themselves, we are going to continue to see the kind of violence that is perpetrated against our women, particularly in our villages. Simply have to wait for the cover of darkness, and it just seems inhuman that that's been such a low priority in our society. That he brought it up as part of his very important address shows the kind of value he's putting on giving this a priority, top priority.
Okay.
However, I do feel that a lot of the women-related issues, he brought them up, but without actually spelling out how he proposes to go ahead with implementing them.
Okay.
Particularly where rape was concerned, he brought it up. He brought it up in terms of the changing minds, that we need to change our mindsets. We need to treat our sons differently, to talk to our sons differently, so that they in turn will be more sensitive and more aware when it comes to dealing with the women in their lives. Fine, but he didn't really talk about addressing what he intends to do to the perpetrators of these heinous crimes.
To be fair, Shobhade, can I interrupt you there? To be fair, I'm interrupting you, but in fact the rape law was comprehensively changed and strengthened by the outgoing government.
So I wish that he had spelled out a little more firmly and more, perhaps more assertive. He would have been more more assertive about what he intends to do.
All right, you made that point. Let me stop you there. You made that point. I'm just going to point out for the audience that in fact the previous government has comprehensively changed and enhanced the rape law. Surely Mr. Modi can't go into that and do it again. I don't think there's even need for it. Many people argue that in fact now you need to in fact ameliorate the law. It was made far too strenuous and far too adverse by the last government. Mr. Shesasai, I'm going to come back to that point Mr. Modi made about the need for businessmen to use their corporate social responsibility funds to build toilets in schools designated for girls. Do you think your fraternity of industrialists will rise to the occasion and do it?
I think they will. To my mind, this is an issue which has been which the legitimacy of this has certainly been understood very well across the country, including businessmen, and I don't see why business should not participate in this very important mission. So I think it is a very direct appeal, and when the Prime Minister makes a direct appeal to the businessmen, I've usually found businessmen rise up to that.
All right. Another thing that he spent a lot of time on, Dipankar Gupta, is what he calls the Sansad Adarsh Gram Yojana, where he asked every MP, and I presume that this will also apply to every MLA, to choose one village and make it a model village in terms of education, health, cleanliness, greenery. And he said he would come up with a blueprint for this by the 11th of October, which is Jayaprakash Narayan's birthday. Will this, if it happens, make a big difference to village development, or is it just an appealing gimmick?
I think this was the weakest part of his speech, if you ask me. Because if the government is going to give a blueprint for all MLAs and MPs to abide by, then the initiative is taken away, number one. Number two, you see the village is no longer what it used to be. So what do you want to really do in a village? Most villages would like to be semi-urban places. And are we thinking along those lines, or do we want to return to the old days of a village, which is all, you know, fertile green plains and so forth?
That was the Gandhian blueprint.
Yeah, which is not what is going on today. Today, more than 60% of the village economy is not rural, not agricultural. So is he taking these on board? Because when you talk about Gramin or whatever Yojana, the Gram doesn't want to be a Gram any longer. And we must see that trajectory and put these things in context.
Can I
which is why
ask you this? Do you think here Mr. Modi is out of sync with the aspirations of Indian villagers?
I think he's taken a very simplistic attitude. He is indeed out of sync, while he may have been in sync in terms of cleanliness, health, hygiene, women's status and the rest of it. He may also have been in sync with some degree of adjustment regarding communal configurations. But on the village issue, it's far too serious to be flippant about it, because the village really is transforming very rapidly. If you look at the last census figures, look at the National Sample Survey figures, the village is not a village in the old-fashioned way any longer. Most villages are in fact becoming census towns.
Very quickly, I want to come, and we've got very little time left, on subjects that Mr. Modi consciously chose not to cover. One of them is corruption. Complete and total silence on corruption, and yet it's been a major issue in Indian politics for a year. Are you surprised by that silence, or are you actually relieved because he's spoken so much in the past?
Well, I think I'm relieved, because if he had, then he would have been attacking the previous government. I think that phase is over. He's done enough of that in the election campaign, which lasted for him almost 1 year, at least 9 months or 8 or 9 months. So I think that chapter is over. For him to say, I will give you a clean administration, again is a platitude. But I'm surprised, picking up the point from Dipankar, while there was talk of villages, and I think that was a bit platitudinous, once again, set up model villages, Anna Hazare set up one, we know. I think there is an issue with over glorification of villages, and takes us back to the old argument.
And he's in danger of that.
India lives in its villages, but must it continue to do so forever? India doesn't want to live in its villages forever. But having said that, I was surprised by complete absence of talk of urbanization, because a lot of the problems of hygiene, of public toilet,
and his own 100 city promise.
Yes, of toilets, of rapes, a lot of these are urban problems.
On that point, Mr. Sheshasai, are you a bit surprised that in fact on infrastructure, which is so important to this government and so important to the vision of modern India, bullet speed trains, 100 cities, right? Nothing. I know he spoke about digital India and the need to create connectivity to bring rural India into the education loop, but that was about the only thing. All the other thoughts about modern India seem to be missing.
Well, but if you're talking about India being the shop floor for the world, it must follow that we must then talk about special economic zones or national economic export manufacturing zones. We must follow that up with issues relating to infrastructure, the hardware of ports capability, airports capability, the software of doing business easily, all of that. I think all of that is a part of that process. No, that's the heavy lifting that has to be done.
Okay.
And I completely agree that because expectations have been raised and this vision is so exciting, there would be this impatience to see some actions follow, and that's going to be the burden. That's going to be the challenge in the next few months. Okay. If this enthusiasm has to be kept alive, that action has to follow now.
General Malik, another area where he was completely silent was on Pakistan and Kashmir. He didn't use the word Pakistan, although he talked about neighbors and how neighbors need to get together to abolish poverty. He didn't talk about China either. Once again, as a former army chief, was that a mistake and a lapse? Or actually, are you relieved because we know his views on those two subjects, and perhaps this was not a need to be reiterated?
Just a few days ago when he had gone to Ladakh and when he was speaking to the soldiers, I think he made his point, his own mind quite clear, and he made I would call it a political clarity on Pakistan issue. That was quite candid as far as the troops were concerned, and he told them what is required to be done. As far as China is concerned, yes, as you said, he was not speaking, he didn't speak much about international relations, except for the cooperation that is required amongst the SAARC nations to work together, something similar to what he did when he took the oath and when he called the prime ministers and presidents of the neighboring country. I personally feel that I thought was adequate, and he did not now, particularly Pakistan itself is such a mess that, you know, whatever you say can go against you.
True.
So I was quite relieved that he didn't have to say much. He didn't say anything to Pakistan.
You wanted to come in?
Yeah, at least for the last 10 years, maybe 11 running, every Independence Day speech talked about Pakistan, the threat to our borders, terrorism, JNK, or Kashmiri Pandits. The first time that no mention has been made of these things.
And that was refreshing.
I think that's a very important symbolic step. Also remember, while there was no mention of the Gandhis, of course, neither did he mention all the stars of the RSS or the BJP. He talked about Jayaprakash Narayan or Lal Bahadur Shastri, you know, and none of the BJP figures.
That
but again,
omission of the stars of the BJP in the RSS is actually particularly important. Thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah, that I think is a very important symbolic move.
Would you agree
most of
that
us
that's a
have
very
overlooked.
important omission?
Yes, absolutely, and I wonder if it's deliberate. But if it is deliberate, which it might be, then I think it's.
You mean it could be a lapse?
Well, it could be absent-mindedness, but I don't think so. I think RSS thought is so central to these people's hearts that, you know, they would not be absent-minded about this. So I think it was a clever thing. But having said that, I think one of the better things about this speech was the absence of negative issues. So you bring in Pakistan, bring in terrorism, bring in your border disputes with neighboring countries. These are all negative things.
In fact,
which is why, in fact, the speech has left such a positive feeling and such a positive flavor.
In fact, he brought in Nepal.
He brought in Nepal, but he brought it in as praise for the way the Maoists are adapting to change and looking forward to a constitution have given up terror. Mr. Shesasai, this may well be the last question in this show. I noticed that there's an enormous amount of stress in the speech on manufacturing. There's a lot on village development and routing money to the village through MP lads or through MPs. Do you think that when the February budget comes, or maybe in the lead up to the February budget, we're going to have major changes in terms of taxation to give a fillip to manufacturing, and that the Rural Development Ministry and its role will perhaps be whittled down considerably as well?
Well, frankly, I don't think that we should expect to see any major changes in taxation before the next budget. But I do believe that, as I said earlier, if the next budget is not a transformational budget, and if it is not giving expression to the kind of issues that have been brought up now as a part of his vision, then there would certainly be a major disappointment. I hope it doesn't happen. I have every reason to believe that that's not the way it's going to be.
Okay.
That is, so far what we have seen is encouraging, and the tempo has to be kept up.
Alec Padamsee, I'm going to go to you for the last word. The impression I get from the answers that my 6 guests have given me is that Mr. Modi is in the position of a cricketer who's opened with a 6, but people now want to know what the rest of the innings will be like. And that, in a sense, he's added to his own pressure with his brilliant performance on day 1, but if the days that follow do not live up to the first day, there could be a sense of disappointment. Would you agree with that impression from this discussion? A quick answer.
I would entirely agree. I would say the one thing, abolish the planning commission. We've got enough plans. I've worked on the 10th 5-year plan on the communications, and they do take outsiders, by the way. But what we need is an implementation commission. You know, all the planning, there are fantastic plans. In fact, even in the first 5-year plan, at least 3 of the items on that have not been completed 50 to 60 years
I'm
later.
going to have to cut you off because I don't want to cut you off. Come to an end quickly. We're out of town. You're saying implementation, that is the test of Mr. Modi. You may well be right, and I'm sure that Mr. Modi believes that, in fact, the test of every promise is your ability to implement it. He's got 4 years and 10 months to do it. You never know, he may well pull another rabbit out of the hat. My thanks to all 6 of my guests for joining me, and if you have been, thanks for watching. For whoever what's left of it, have a wonderful Independence Day. Goodbye, good night.